A widower, living a quiet and lonely life, crosses paths with the sole survivor of a brutal massacre deep in the wild. But this woman is no ordinary person, and her past is silently closing in on them. We're just a few steps away from reaching our first 1,000 subscribers, our growing family. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you to everyone who's brought us this far. With your support, we grow stronger with every story. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time. Jonathan Keller was riding slowly. The steps of his old horse, Bruno, were steady and quiet, like a metronome worn down by time. He didn't rush anywhere anymore. There had been a time when he had places to be, people waiting for him, dreams to chase. Now, only habit remained. Habit and loneliness. He had been living alone on this land ever since he lost his wife years ago. His hands were calloused, his back carried the weight of time, and in his eyes were traces of a sorrow that had forgotten how to cry. That morning, the wind smelled different. Not clean rusty. Bruno suddenly flinched, his ears pinned back. Jonathan stopped without pulling the reins. Just a few meters ahead, on the edge of the valley, he saw blackened marks on the ground. The smell of something burned flesh and smoke hung heavy in the air. He got off his horse. Even the sound of his boots crushing dry grass echoed in the stillness. No one was around, only the silence of death, the kind that only ghosts could live in. Behind a hill, he found the wreckage of a shattered wagon. The wheels were broken, bullets lodged in the wooden frame. White cloths, stained with blood, flapped like shrouds in the wind. There were bodies around. A woman's hand stretched out on the ground, her fingers curled like they were still holding onto a ring. Jonathan didn't count. He didn't need to. In scenes like this, numbers only made your heart heavier. This wasn't a robbery. This was a massacre. His eyes settled on a burned-out campfire. Beside it, a man lay on his back, his face scorched and unrecognizable under a charred beard. And then, he heard a sound. A faint, thin moan, like the echo of a breath. If it wasn't a ghost, it had to be a miracle. Jonathan crouched down, listening. Behind a scorched crate, under a blanket covered in ash, something moved. He lifted the cover gently. It was a young woman, her face dark with soot, her eyelids twitching. He moved his hand toward her face still warm. Weak, but alive. Her dress was fancy. Now it was torn and dirty, but the lace and embroidery whispered that it once cost a fortune. One glove was still on her right hand. The left was bare, her knuckles bruised, nails broken from digging in the dirt. He didn't ask her name. It didn't matter. First, she had to survive. Jonathan gently lifted her into his arms. She was light, frighteningly so, like life had already left her, and only the memory of it lingered on her skin. Bruno didn't make a sound, even though he could smell the blood. Slowly, they moved on. Jonathan didn't look back. There was nothing left behind but death. His cabin was a little ways up the hill, hidden among trees that broke the wind. A quiet, lonely place. He'd built it himself after Mary died. Every nail, every board, every brick laid with silent rage. Back then, it felt like some kind of revenge. Now, it was just a reminder. He laid the woman gently on the narrow wooden bed. The fire was still burning. He took a cloth, dipped it in water, and started cleaning her face. The soot at the corners of her eyes, the dried blood on her lips slowly wiped away. She didn't open her eyes, but her breathing was steadier. They didn't talk that night. Jonathan sat by the fire, his back against the wall, gun by his knee, eyes watching her chest rise and fall. It was the only thing telling him she was still alive. Late into the night, the woman sighed. Maybe she was dreaming, no one could tell, but she murmured a name, Annalise. Jonathan didn't turn his head. He wouldn't know if that name belonged to her, but it didn't matter. Remembering her name wasn't as important as just staying alive. By morning, the cabin was wrapped in fog. The wind was still. Jonathan left a cup of water by her side. At that moment, her eyelids fluttered open. She turned her head slightly. Her eyes were gray like a stormy sky. In a weak whisper, she asked, "Why did you save me?" Jonathan's voice was rough and slow. "Because if no one does, everyone dies." She turned her head back. There were no tears in her eyes, but her gaze carried the anger of a life worn thin. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask for her story. He just sat there, and the hours passed. When she fell asleep again, Jonathan stepped outside. The sky had grown heavy. A storm was coming. But this time, it might not just be the weather. The past could be in those clouds too. On the morning of the second day, Annalise stayed awake a bit longer. Jonathan had gone outside to chop wood. The woman dragged herself to the edge of the bed and looked out the window. The air was still damp, the ground covered in mist. She touched the window glass with her fingertips, as if trying to figure out whether the world beyond the glass was real. That's when she realized how much her body hurt. Her ribs ached, and there was a constant pain in her stomach. But the worst part wasn't physical. It was the images echoing in her mind. Screams, the smell of gunpowder, blood-spattered faces. They all came rushing back at once. When Jonathan slowly opened the door, she was still by the window. "You should have stayed in bed," he said. There was no judgment in his tone, it was just habit. Annalise didn't turn around. She simply asked, "How many did you see?" He paused a bit. 7 bodies. Maybe 8. Some were burned. I didn't hear any children. She lowered her head. Her fingers were still on the window frame. "There were 10 of us," she said quietly. "All silent. All running. Me too." Jonathan didn't approach. He knew how to keep his distance. Some spaces people had to go into alone. When she turned to him, her eyes didn't hold a stranger anymore but a witness. "Who were you?" she asked. He didn't look away. "Just an ordinary farmer. Now I'm just a man who chose to stay." She gave a bitter smile. "I chose to run, but I forgot who I was." That day, they worked quietly together. Jonathan fed the chickens and fixed the broken part of the fence. Annalise tried to gather dry grass, but every time she bent down, her ribs protested. When Jonathan noticed, he just said one thing: "Take it slow." The first storm came around noon. The sky turned to lead, and the thunder rolled down from the mountains like a roar of anger. The wind shook the door, thin branches scratched the windows. Inside, by the fire, Annalise's shoulders were trembling. Jonathan brought an old blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders. That moment, she turned her head and studied him. "How did you lose your wife?" Jonathan didn't answer right away. Then, in a low voice, he said, "Plague. It lasted 3 days. I couldn't do anything. After that, I didn't want to do anything." Annalise turned her eyes to the fire. As the flames danced in her pupils, she whispered, "I was forced into an engagement. They didn't even care who I was with. I was sold for a name, for a deal. The only reason I got on that wagon was so no one could find me." Jonathan didn't look at her face, but quietly reached for the kettle. He filled 2 cups. "You're here now," he said, "and you're still standing. That's something." That night, the storm got stronger. As the wind battered the roof outside, for the first time, music was heard inside. Annalise started playing with the small, dusty mandolin hanging on the wall. Her fingers were still swollen, so the notes came out wrong, but the melody was clear. Jonathan looked up. She kept playing soft, broken, but steady. When she finished, she didn't say anything. Neither did he. But the silence wasn't the same anymore. The third morning was quiet. The air was strangely cold as the sun rose. Jonathan was headed toward the field when he turned at the sound of his horse neighing. Bruno was restless. When Jonathan reached the fence, he noticed footprints. Fresh ones. They'd come during the night. The tracks stopped a few meters from the cabin, then turned back into the woods. When he returned, Annalise had left the window open. "Someone was here," Jonathan said. The woman flinched. "Is it the ones after me?" "Maybe," the man said. "But it's clear they're watching. They haven't attacked yet." That day, he cleaned the weapons. He also handed the woman a knife. "I don't know how to use it," Annalise said. "You'll learn," Jonathan replied. "Because hiding is no longer a luxury you have." She looked at him, and in that moment, her eyes didn't hold fear. Maybe for the first time, it was anger. "If they come again," she said, "this time I won't stay silent." Jonathan nodded. "Then we won't stay silent together." At sunset, as smoke rose from the cabin roof and the fire began to crackle and die down, a small spark appeared on the far side of the valley. A fire. A campfire. And right above it, for a brief moment, the glint of a scope. The night was quiet, but it wasn't peace. It was the deep breath before the storm. Because the shadows had returned. They didn't sleep all night. Jonathan sat by the window. His rifle rested on his knees, eyes locked on the forest. Annalise sat by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, her fingers hidden in her palms. It wasn't fear anymore, it was waiting. That kind of waiting felt like smoke building up in the silence. Invisible, but suffocating. From time to time, Jonathan stepped outside to look for more tracks in the mud, then came back in. His face looked harder now. The wrinkles around his eyes had deepened not from worry, but from focus. Morning came quietly. Just before the sun rose, Bruno neighed again. This time it was short, sharp, and full of fear. When Jonathan cracked the door open, he couldn't see anyone, but he did catch the shadow of something falling across the ground. Someone was watching them, and they weren't staying far anymore. They were getting closer. Annalise had come to the window too. "There's something I need to tell you," she said softly. Jonathan turned his head. "I'm listening." She took a breath. "The people looking for me. It's not just my family, not just my last name. A few days before I got on that wagon, someone started following me. He was sent because I broke a deal. He worked for the man I was forced to get engaged to. Cold-blooded, a hired tracker. I don't know his name, but I'll never forget his eyes. Someone like that doesn't give up." Jonathan thought for a second. "That light we saw last night. Could have been him." "Yes," she said, her voice cracking. "If it's him, these cabin walls won't stop him." Jonathan opened the door all the way. "Then we'll wait for him outside." The two of them walked into the woods together. The only sound was the crunch of dry twigs. Jonathan followed the tracks boot prints pressed into the ground, showing how the weight had sunk deeper with every step. This person wasn't alone. There were at least 2 more sets of prints. 3 people, armed, clearly. Their steps were steady. Hunters. Just behind a bush, they found the ashes of last night's campfire. Still warm. Annalise stepped back. Jonathan crouched down and spotted something shiny in the ashes. A brass button. It had a delicate crest carved on it. "Do you recognize this?" he asked. Without even looking, Annalise said, "Yes. That man's coat. This is official. They're not coming for money, they're coming for my name." Jonathan stood up. "They're not entering the forest anymore. They drew us out here. So what do we do now?" Jonathan's answer was clear. "If they've attacked, then we respond." On the way back, they came up with a plan. Jonathan started fortifying the cabin. He built barricades from old planks, covered the windows with sacks. He had oil-soaked fuses between the bricks. He gave Annalise a small pistol, showed her once how to use it. "If someone comes to the door," she asked, "will I really be able to shoot?" "If you don't," Jonathan said, "you won't be able to ask again." The day dragged on. The birds had gone quiet. It was as if every living thing could sense what was coming. Annalise stayed inside the cabin. She sat by the window, pressing her hands into her knees, trying to stay calm. Jonathan stood outside, by the barricade, waiting for sunset. Because once the darkness came, those men would too. And they did. The first sound came around midnight. The moonlight painted the ground silver as a bush rustled on the eastern side of the cabin. Jonathan raised his rifle. Then came a whistle, a simple melody. So basic even a child could memorize it, but it carried poison in its tune. Jonathan ducked down and motioned to Annalise. "Go to the back door. Stay quiet. We're not running, but we might need to move." Footsteps outside the door. Then a voice. "Baroness," it said, soft but threatening. "No need to be afraid. We only came to talk." Jonathan stepped in front of the door. "People who want to talk don't show up at night." "Oh really?" the man replied. "Plenty happens at night. Like birth, like death, like forgetting." Jonathan gripped the trigger tight. No one in this house forgets anything. And then a gunshot. A bullet shattered the window, whizzing right past Annalise. Jonathan hit the floor and returned fire. Someone outside screamed, then silence. "There's still one more," Jonathan shouted. "Where did the other 2 go?" Annalise scanned the windows with her eyes. Her breath was ragged. "I don't know. Don't go out." But just then, the back door creaked. A figure appeared. Tall, face hidden in shadow. He stepped forward slowly. A gun gleamed in his hand. His eyes, icy cold. "It's you," Annalise said, voice trembling. "You're the one who found me." The man smiled. "I never lost you." Just then, Jonathan lunged. He'd slung his rifle behind him and now attacked with an axe. As the man raised his gun, Jonathan tackled him to the ground. The 2 bodies tangled, rolling through the dirt. The gun fired. A bird flew off in the distance. Then, silence. Annalise covered her mouth with both hands. Her eyes welled up. She ran to the door. Jonathan was on his knees, breathing hard but alive. The man lay still. His gun was far off, eyes open but empty. "Is it over?" she asked, kneeling down. Jonathan looked up. "No," he said. "It's just beginning." And that night, silence returned. But this time, it carried an echo inside it. Survival would no longer be just luck, it would have to be a decision. When the sun rose the next morning, the land was quiet, but the shadows within it hadn't left. Jonathan dragged the man's lifeless body beyond the trees. He didn't bury him. He just covered him. What really held his attention was the elegant letter he had found in the dead man's pocket. The paper was dry, but the ink was still fresh. When he broke the seal, he saw a familiar name: Evelyn Amelie Hartmann. While Annalise stirred the soup inside the cabin, Jonathan crumpled the letter in his hand. Now he knew the name, and the woman knew far better than he did what she had buried with it. When he stepped inside, the woman's eyes immediately locked on the letter. Her lips moved, then stopped. She didn't start the conversation. Jonathan sat at the table without breaking eye contact. "Is that your name?" he asked straight out. She lowered her head for a moment, then slowly looked up. "Yes," she said, "but only on paper. That name doesn't belong to me." It didn't. That name was a chain. Jonathan placed the letter on the table. "And on one end of that chain are people looking for your name. And on the other is the shadow of a family feared more for its power than its money. Is that it?" Annalise didn't look away. "I ran because a man didn't want to marry me, he wanted to own me. Like property. I ran because I didn't want a life, I just wanted to survive." Jonathan's voice didn't harden, it just deepened. "But he found you." She nodded. "He was just the first one they sent. If he doesn't return, more will come." The silence grew heavy in the room. Only the crackling fire laid a thin blanket over the tangled hesitations. That day, Jonathan was quiet, but always in motion. He set traps behind the barn, started digging a hidden passage beneath the cabin. It wasn't an escape tunnel, it was a way to buy time. He knew now. This wasn't just his fight anymore. It was a story meant for two. For the first time, Annalise went outside alone. She picked up an old pair of garden shears, trimmed wildflowers along the fence, then placed them in small glass jars, lined them up along the window ledge, as if she was calling life back into the cabin that had been stained with death. But no matter how many flowers she planted, the coming storm could no longer be stopped. That evening, they ate together. They smiled for the first time, but they both knew this quiet joy was just the final breeze before the war. Jonathan spoke. "If they come again, this time we won't wait. We'll go to them." Annalise set her spoon down. "What do you mean?" "While the enemy's searching the cabin, you cut off their path." Her eyes sharpened. I can't fight. I can barely hold a gun." Jonathan nodded slowly. "Then you'll be the sound, the melody, the trigger. You're not running anymore, Evelyn. This time, you'll write your own story." He said her name for the first time. Evelyn. And in that moment, she felt the ice inside her start to melt. The name was no longer a chain, it had become armor. They set out early the next morning. Jonathan followed old hunting trails. Evelyn walked behind him, a small bag on her back, secret notes tucked in her pocket. The abandoned mill on the far side of the valley would be the center of their plan. The mill no longer worked, but the structure was still solid. Jonathan had prepared a trap there, not with explosives but with knowledge. When Evelyn stepped inside, she saw the maps drawn on the walls, dotted routes, tracking paths, and most important, Jonathan's observations. The paths followed by the three who had been watching him for weeks. Each different, but all leading to the same goal. "Tonight," Jonathan said, "we draw them here. And for the first time, we do the talking." By late afternoon, Evelyn put on her old coat. She strapped the small pistol she'd practiced with a few times to her belt. Her hands were trembling, but not from fear anymore. From anger and resolve. Jonathan gave her a small compass. "What if you don't come back?" she asked. Jonathan stepped closer. "Then forget the name you started with. Choose your own." She lifted her head. Her eyes were on fire. "I already have." And when night fell, Jonathan waited inside the mill, rifle ready, while Evelyn walked alone down the path. Moonlight hit her shoulders. Even in the dark, her face stood tall, her steps sure. Because this time, Evelyn wasn't waiting for the past to catch up. She had come to knock on its door. As the moonlight sliced through the stones of the path like a blade, Evelyn walked slowly but steadily. With every step, the small pistol at her belt tapped against her coat, reminding her that she was still breathing. When she said goodbye to Jonathan, her heart had screamed in silence. But now there was only a deep stillness inside her. Deep enough to silence the voices of those who remembered her name and wanted her to forget who she was. At the end of the valley, three figures on horseback appeared in the shadows. Evelyn didn't stop. As they got closer, they met eyes. The man in the center, wearing a gray coat draped over his shoulders, had a thin mustache and a familiar smirk. In that smirk lay Evelyn's past, her days under pressure, and the price she paid to escape. His name was Daniel Muller. He had once been a loyal protector of Evelyn's uncle. Or so it seemed. Evelyn Amelie Hartmann, he said slowly. Or whatever name you're using now. Evelyn stopped, held her head high. Evelyn is enough. I buried the rest of my names in the ground. Daniel nodded slightly, while the two other men stayed alert. I've come to take you. You know they're not convinced. Ever since they found out you're alive, they've been after you. I'm just the first step. Not convinced, Evelyn said, her voice like steel, that I could choose my own life. No, the man replied, that you were bold enough to ruin someone else's game. When you ran, a chain broke, and at the end of that chain, it wasn't just you. Political ties, business deals. Your last name was everything. Evelyn gave a bitter smile. I'm not some bargaining chip at anyone's table. Daniel took a step forward. What about Jonathan Keller? Does he know what he's gotten himself into? We know what's in his past, Evelyn. His loneliness wasn't a choice, it was exile. You shouldn't have trusted him. Evelyn's fingers slowly moved to the pistol. Don't say his name. Daniel's expression changed. Oh, untouchable now? Interesting. People forget who they drag with them when they change. But the past, it always counts its steps. Evelyn narrowed her eyes. Did you come to take me back or to threaten me? Daniel tilted his head. If neither works, other methods will. Just then, the bell at the top of the mill rang. Evelyn stepped back. Daniel and his men flinched. And then, a gunshot echoed. The man beside Daniel spun in the air and hit the ground. Jonathan, Evelyn whispered. Panicking, the second man reached for his weapon, but a second shot hit him in the chest. Daniel turned to Evelyn, about to draw his gun, but it was too late. Evelyn, summoning every ounce of courage, pulled the trigger. When the pistol fired, everything seemed to freeze. Time stood still with the bullet cutting through the air. Daniel dropped to his knees. His eyes held both surprise and acceptance. Dying at the hands of a baroness. How strange, he said in a fading voice. I'm not that anymore, Evelyn said. I'm just me. As Daniel collapsed to the ground, Evelyn dropped to her knees too. Her breath was uneven, but her eyes were steady. Jonathan came running through the woods and found her dropping the gun with trembling hands. It's over, Evelyn said. It's all over. Jonathan knelt down, wrapped his arms around her. No, he said. This is just a new beginning. They stayed at the mill that night. Jonathan lit a fire. Evelyn sat quietly, staring at her hands. I killed someone. Jonathan nodded. You took your life back. What if more come? Then we faced them together. You're not alone anymore. Evelyn lifted her eyes. She didn't see that old, quiet sadness in Jonathan's gaze. Instead, there was something deeper, something alive, hope. The next morning, they returned to the cabin. Silence had returned, but it was no longer suffocating. It was gentle. Evelyn rearranged the flowers. Jonathan fixed the porch. The war was behind them, but the marks weren't gone. They would carry those marks without shame, without hiding. Now, when Evelyn looked out the window at night, she didn't look with fear but with curiosity. How big is this sky? Jonathan came beside her, took her hand. Big enough, he said, to hold a whole new life. And this time, for the first time, Evelyn truly smiled. Months passed. The land turned green, the wind softened, and the silence inside the house became less of a weight and more of a refuge. Every morning, Evelyn stepped onto the porch barefoot, letting the dew-soaked boards chill her feet as she looked up at the sky. The emptiness that once frightened her now felt like it belonged to her. The dreams that whispered her name had stopped. Now there were only morning birds and the coffee Jonathan brought from inside each morning. The inside of the cabin had changed. New shelves, lace curtains, a warmth unlike the past. But the biggest change was in the two people who lived there. Evelyn no longer hid her face, and Jonathan no longer wore his silence like a shield. The quiet was still there, but now it was so they could breathe easier together. One morning, Jonathan quietly pulled out a box from his chest. Inside was a rusty ring. Mary's ring. He had buried it years ago, then tried to forget. But now, as he touched it, his fingers didn't tremble. He turned to Evelyn, who had walked over to him. When you first came here, all I had in my chest was the weight of the earth, he said. But you broke that weight. So, If you'll have me, let's build a life together. Evelyn didn't look at the ring, she looked into his eyes. I ran for years trying to forget my name, she said. But you didn't just remind me of my name, you reminded me I exist. Yes, a forever yes. That day, they married under the big oak tree behind the cabin. The witnesses were the wind and the birds. Evelyn wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself. Jonathan wore his father's old shirt. They didn't recite vows or make promises because in this story, every word had already been a vow. A few weeks after the wedding, Evelyn was no longer nervous. She started going into town freely. She held Jonathan's hand and bought bread using her own name. She chatted with a woman, patted a child's hair. No one called her Baroness. She was just Evelyn. That simple name was now her pride. But the past always waits for the quietest moment. One morning, the old man who brought the mail left a weathered envelope. She recognized the seal. It was from her family. Inside was a single note. One of us would not die without saying sorry. After reading the note, Jonathan just nodded. The final circle, he said. But this time, not defense closure. Evelyn made her decision instantly. I'll go. To him. Jonathan didn't hesitate. Then we'll go together. They set off. They boarded an old wagon, the road dusty, but their hearts at ease. Maybe this was goodbye, or maybe it was the final seal of freedom. When they arrived, an old man greeted them. His eyes were cloudy, but his expression was clear. He looked at Evelyn and dropped to his knees. I only ever tried to protect you, but I changed you to a name. I'm sorry. Evelyn gently lifted his head. I don't feel like I need to forgive anymore. I feel forgiven. So yes, I forgive you. As the sun set, Jonathan and Evelyn returned to the wagon. Everything was behind them now. Only the scars remained, but scars don't carry a person. A person carries the scars. When they got back, Jonathan prepared a small wooden table. On it, he placed a handmade sign. Keller, Hartmann. New beginnings. Evelyn stepped inside and sat at the piano. She touched each key one by one, then turned to Jonathan. Can I ask you something? Of course. I know I'm not a baroness anymore, but am I still worth something? Jonathan walked over and placed his hands on her shoulders. You're not just worth something, you're irreplaceable. And that night, Evelyn listened to the echoes of the past one last time. Then she played her own melody on the piano, her own rhythm, her own life. As moonlight poured into the cabin, Evelyn and Jonathan sat side by side on the porch once more, coffee in hand, the wood creaking gently beneath their feet. Do you think the past ever comes back? Evelyn asked. Maybe, Jonathan said, looking up at the sky. But when it does, we'll still be here. Not hiding, living. Yes, Evelyn said. This time we'll speak not from silence, but from hope. And in that moment, the night spread stars above them. The vast sky was no longer a threat, it was home. And their story ended quietly, but proudly. Because now, it wasn't the past that spoke, it was the future they had written together. The end. By the way, we noticed something small. Most people who watch these stories aren't actually subscribed to the channel. Maybe we get caught up in the moment, or just forget to hit the button. But your support truly helps us keep creating stories like this. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel.